James Garner was not the type of person who would start a fight. People in Hollywood knew him as calm, professional, and well-liked by practically everyone he worked with. He was the kind of performer that was always on time, knew his lines, and was nice to everyone on set, from the lighting guy to the director. People should have listened when he said he was worried about someone, but they didn't. Garner told others to be careful of one actress who was elegant, famous, and a legend in her own right. He made it plain that there was something about her that just didn't set right with him behind closed doors. People ignored him for years. She had won over admirers, charmed the press, and built a career on being bold, smart, and hard to ignore. She was everything that Hollywood loved on the outside. But James Garner had seen a different side of her, one that didn't come out very often. But when it did, everything changed. It took years for stories to come out from other performers, directors, and even crew members. And all of a sudden, Garner's calm warning didn't seem so crazy anymore. It really did seem like he had been right all along. So what really happened between James Garner and this famous person? What did he notice that made him say something? And why did it take Hollywood so long to believe him? You need to know who James Garner was to the world to understand why his warning was so shocking and easy to ignore. Lauren Bacall was not just any old actress. She was a star in Hollywood. She changed what it meant to be cool, confident, and in charge from the first time she was on television in the 1940s. She had that low, smoky voice and those iconic arched eyebrows. She filmed her first movie with Humphrey Bogart in Have and Have Not, and everything changed from there. Their connection was electrifying, both on and off film, and Bacall swiftly became more than simply a rising star. She became a symbol of strength, mystery, and glamour. People who didn't like her loved her. Fans looked up to her and studios respected her. Bacall stood out in a business that valued youth and obedience because of her sharp wit, strong will, and refusal to follow anybody else's rules. She went through the industry like a magnet, getting a reputation as a tough, no-nonsense lady who always got what she wanted. Interviews made her seem very smart and refreshingly honest. She said what she thought, went against the rules, and wouldn't let herself be typecast as a damsel or sidekick. Before the term feminist even became popular, she was a role model for many. But there were murmurs behind all that charm and polish. The kind of whispers that never made it into magazine articles or TV interviews. Some of the people who worked with her said she was chilly, domineering, and even condescending. People who liked her or saw her perform wouldn't say it, but in secret circles, her name came with a warning. Real, but quiet and subtle. But when those whispers came up, they were largely ignored because Lauren Bacall was Lauren Bacall. She had made her whole life about being brave and not saying sorry. Some others found her confidence to be encouraging. But for some people, including a well-known actor, it was something different. James Garner, on the other hand, saw the difference. He could feel it. And after they worked together, he couldn't keep it to himself. That was just the start, though. Lauren Bacall and James Garner were already famous in their own right by the time they worked on the same film. Garner became famous for his natural charisma in Maverick and solidified his standing with the Rockford Files. He was the kind of person that everyone liked. He was calm, easygoing, and had a dry sense of humor that made even the hardest people laugh. People on set knew him for being polite to everyone, from directors to extras. Garner was down to earth in a town full with egos. Then there was The Fan, a psychological thriller that came out in 1981. Bacall played a Broadway actress who was being hounded by a fan, and Garner played her ex-husband. It should have been a pleasant partnership between two experienced professionals, but Garner felt something was wrong nearly as soon as production started. People who were close to the production say that the tension between the two was not that bad. It was calm, cool, and professional on the outside, yet there was a silent tension that couldn't be ignored. Garner was used to setups that felt like home. Bacall introduced something new. She was exacting, demanding, and sometimes rude to others who didn't reach her standards or who tried to take over. She didn't yell, but her energy was strong enough to keep everyone on edge. Garner never sought to outdo her or engage into power battles, on the other hand. He didn't do that. He also didn't pretend that something wasn't working, though. It looked like Bacall didn't care much about changing her approach to keep the peace. She knew where she stood and made sure everyone else did too. Some crew members started talking behind closed doors. There were rumors that Bacall was altering lines on site or disputing the director's authority during blocking. Garner didn't want to cause trouble, but he was getting more and more angry. Not because he required special treatment, but because the work was suffering. He would later drop hints about how bad the event had been without identifying individuals. But others who knew him and the set knew exactly who he was talking about. Not only did Bacall's behavior affect him, but it also affected a number of other people who worked on the movie. And to make matters worse, Bacall didn't notice the problem. She thought she was just being direct, professional, and efficient, but to Garner, it was something completely different. He had dealt with many kinds of people throughout the years, from bold to shy to strange to strong-willed. He didn't see confidence in Bacall, he saw control, but not the sort that earns respect, the kind that pushes people away. Garner kept most of it to himself for now, but he wouldn't stay quiet for long. People never knew James Garner to throw people under the bus. He was reserved, polite, and nearly immune to gossip. So when he said something about someone, even in passing, it meant something. And when he eventually talked about Lauren Bacall years after they worked together on The Fan, he was very clear. He never fully attacked Bacall in his memoir, The Garner Files. That wasn't his style, but he made it apparent that their time together had been, in his words, hard. He said she was sharp and guarded and often looked down on the people around her. He didn't say who he was talking about or make any charges, but it was clear that her actions had a lasting effect, and it wasn't a good one. He said that working with her was like walking on eggshells. She thought everything would go her way and didn't want to make any deals. Garner, who valued working together and being kind, thought her way of doing things was tiring. What disturbed him most was not only how she acted, but how readily other people let it go. People didn't notice what was going on right in front of them because of her legacy, beauty, and prestige. That wasn't out of the ordinary in Hollywood. People with a lot of authority have been forgiven for things that would never be accepted from anybody else, especially if they had a huge list of supporters and a golden age resume. Garner's comments didn't make the news or cause any trouble. Most individuals actually ignored them. After all, Bacall was a legend. She had worked with the finest, married Humphrey Bogart, and made a whole career out of being brave and not apologizing. People who grumbled about her were typically thought to be weak or envious. But Garner didn't have to prove anything. He wasn't angry. He didn't have a plan. He was only being honest and straightforward, like he always had been. Maybe that's why it was so easy to miss. He wasn't yelling from rooftops or giving the press stories. He was only discreetly warning the next person in line so that they would have a better time than he had. Sadly, most people didn't listen to that warning, and they probably should have because it was evident that Garner wasn't alone once the stories started to pile up. People mostly recall The Fan as a sleek, creepy thriller that was made better by Lauren Bacall's strong presence. But the public never noticed the strain that was building just out of sight. Something much less glamorous was going on behind the cameras while they were filming. James Garner was a well-known actor who had worked with Julie Andrews and Steve McQueen, among others. He was rarely bothered by his co-stars. But when he was on the Fan set, he had to be very careful. Bacall never openly hostile, but he made the whole set feel strained. Conversations were short, and instructions became orders. And if you tried to give her ideas or suggestions, especially if they went against her authority, she would often ignore you or be cold. Later, crew members talked of a dynamic that was hard to miss. Bacall wanted to be in charge of more than just her sequences, she wanted to be in charge of the whole production. She questioned the direction, pushed back against rewrites, and was known to go against judgments she thought didn't fit her vision. Garner, who valued peace and productivity, largely kept his anger to himself, but his body language and short comments suggested a different message. There were rumors at one point that Bacall and the movie's director, Edward Bianchi, didn't get along. People who worked on the movie said that Bacall's insistence on doing things her way slowed down production and caused problems between the team. Garner, who was usually professional, tried his best to seem neutral, but it was clear he wasn't having fun. Bacall's ability to turn on and off the charm like a switch made things even more complicated. She was sure of herself and funny to the press. She may be harsh, controlling, and distant with the cast and crew. Garner once said that working with someone like that was like being in a frigid room where the thermostat never changed. It wasn't a heated argument. It was the kind that slowly wears people down. There were no big fights caught on video or written about in gossip columns. It was the little things, like snubs, silences, and oblique comments, that made it plain what was going on. And they were the kinds of fights that don't usually make the news, but people who were there always remember them. Garner learned something from the experience. Not all of the biggest fights leave the biggest marks. It was the silent ones, and soon he would learn that he wasn't the only one who had felt that chill. James Garner wasn't the only one who felt apprehensive after meeting Lauren Bacall. Many actors and people who worked on the show have said similar things over the years. Stories that didn't make the news very often, but were spoken about in dressing rooms, green rooms, and private chats. One of the most telling things about Bacall was how she dealt with people who had strong personalities. She made it quite clear that she wasn't afraid of anyone. Some people liked her confidence, but others thought it was too assertive, even hostile. Bacall was infamous for pushing directors and getting into fights with co-stars who didn't match her enthusiasm, especially on Broadway. People who work in theater say that there were times when rehearsals got tense, not because of lack of expertise or artistic differences, but because Bacall wanted to run the performance her way. Even experienced actors felt the pressure. One performer who had worked with her on a revival apparently left the show in the middle of it, saying that they couldn't agree on creative issues. This is a phrase that typically hides deeper personal problems. People said that Bacall's thirst for control had transformed working together into a war zone. Even though the event was never made public, it added to the hushed stories that people tell about her behind the scenes. Brenda Vaccaro, an actress who worked in similar circles, once said in an interview that Bacall might be hard to please when things weren't about her. Even though she never said who she was talking about, the time and place made it plain. Even people who liked Bacall's work said that working with her might be tiring. One anonymous stage performer remembered that she was great, but when she walked in, the air seemed to get thinner. Then there was the issue of friends who had been close for a long time but had become distant co-workers. Some of Bacall's closest business connections eventually fell apart, not because of scandal or betrayal, but just because it got too emotionally hard to stay close. She may be loyal, but she could also be demanding, dominating, and very critical. One of her friends from when she was younger said that she was the kind of person who remembered every little thing that hurt her and made sure you did too. This edge of caution showed in her interviews, too. Bacall talked about being honest a lot, but only when it suited her. She was quick to criticize others, especially other actors. She once told a reporter that most of them never had to struggle as hard as I did. It was a telling observation, not just about how she saw the world, but also about how she judged other people. It looked like Bacall thought that respect had to be gained the hard way. And even then, it wasn't always offered freely. When you put these testimonies together, you can see the stage tensions, the strained friendships, and the quiet comments from actors who have been through it all. Garner wasn't the only one who said something. He was one of a small group of people who had been through the same cold front. And even though none of them yelled it from the rooftops, the pattern was clear. And soon, that pattern would catch up with Bacall's reputation in a way that even her fans couldn't ignore. As the years went by and Lauren Bacall's career got less attention, something strange started to happen. Not because of a scandal or a media frenzy, but because of the quiet honesty of time, the carefully crafted image she had worked on for years began to fall apart. As more autobiographies came out, more interviews were brought back to life, and more people who had worked in the industry thought about their own experiences, the once whispered realities about Bacall became harder to ignore. James Garner's quiet caution that she wasn't as easy to work with as her polished reputation made her seem began to ring true in ways that no one had expected. After the fan, other people who worked with him started to talk more openly. Directors who had kept quiet before talked about how hard it was to work with Bacall, saying she was uncompromising and tended to take over a project. One director said she was intelligent but couldn't be moved, and that she didn't know how to compromise. Even her fans noticed that her later interviews had a new tone. Bacall's comments about Hollywood got more and more nasty as she got older. She said bad things about present stars, ignored emerging potential, and called herself one of the last real actresses. Some people liked how she stood up for herself, but others saw something else. A refusal to change and a dislike for anyone who hadn't lived through her time. It wasn't only on paper. Bacall often came across as chile or dismissive on award shows and in interviews late in her career. She would shrug off inquiries or correct presenters in the middle of a sentence. People used to regard confidence as a sign of superiority, which made them angry. Her mystery slowly gave way to a more complicated truth. And then there were the lookbacks. As film historians looked back on Hollywood's golden age, they started to see Bacall in a different light. Of course, people still celebrated her. It was clear that she was talented, present, and influential, but the image of the untouchable Queen of Cool was replaced with something more complex. A lady who had to fight hard to get her place in the business, and in the process, she may have lost the love of people around her. James Garner never bragged. He never stated, "I told you so." That wasn't how he did things. But for some who had read between the lines of his memoir and remembered what he had said, things started to make sense. He had seen it long before anyone else did. The emotional remoteness, the power plays, and the urge to be in charge of every place she walked into. Garner's simple truth stood tall against Bacall's huge myth in a community where reputations are everything. What made it even more compelling was that he had nothing to gain by saying it. He wasn't looking for revenge or publicity. He just couldn't act like it hadn't happened. And now that they could see the whole picture, they could finally see it. James Garner never made a scene in the end. He never complained about anything on talk shows, wrote a dramatic expose, or sought to ruin someone's reputation. That wasn't who he was, but he also wouldn't act like it. What he went through with Lauren Bacall left an imprint, not because it was violent or terrible, but because it quietly showed him how hard it is to work with someone who cares more about control than connection. Garner's story is more than simply about one bad movie set. It is about the bigger picture in Hollywood. That picture often hides the truth, and legends aren't always what they seem to be. For years, no one questioned Bacall's status as a strong, uncompromising icon. People complimented her for her fire, strength, and refusal to back down. But people frequently forgot that that same fire might hurt the people around her. She wasn't bad, but she was hard to deal with. And sometimes hard things leave scars. Garner saw it, felt it, and instead of attacking, he opted to be honest. A calm honesty that, over time, turned out to be stronger than any headline. That could be why this story is so interesting. Not the drama or the tension, but the fact that one of Hollywood's most likable performers witnessed something that others chose to overlook. He didn't yell it, he murmured it. Not to hurt someone, but to tell the truth because someone had to. So the next time you hear about a well-known actor making a quiet comment, raising a mild red flag, or sharing a story that doesn't exactly fit with what everyone else is saying, ask yourself what they truly mean. James Garner tried to warn us, but no one listened.